in our Pretoria studio by the Finance Minister, Nene. Thank you very much for joining us, Finance Minister, and we'd love to talk to you about the BRICS. You've just returned from that summit. But first, Jill Marcus once again calling for structural reforms, and I'd like to know from your perspective, what's needed if we diagnose the South African economy right now? Business people obviously saying that there needs to be more flexible labour laws, more policy certainty. What do you think is the problem from your perspective?
Thanks, Francis, and thanks for inviting me. Firstly, I think what the governor is referring to is the urgent need to move with the implementation of our National Development Plan. The National Development Plan states clearly what the constraints are, which are clearly spelled out in the diagnostic that actually preceded the National Development Plan itself, and focusing on reducing the cost of doing business and also reduce the cost of living for the vulnerable and the poor. And practically what we are talking here is making sure that we remove constraints, but also barriers to actually, and the bottlenecks to doing business, creating employment and dealing with issues of inequality and poverty, and create employment in the process. But create an environment also where business, small, medium and large, are able to perform optimally.
The Reserve Bank governor also talking about labour relations, and a lot of concern has been expressed. Now, from businesses' perspective, productivity is not going up, their costs are going up. From a worker's perspective, they want to earn a living wage. We have seen some intervention from government, but what do you think government's role is in this quagmire that just doesn't seem to be going away?
Look, first, government has put in place a labor relations environment that should work in the current situation. But you will find that from time to time there will be those seasons. You know, when it's a season for negotiations, there will be precedents once the other one has taken a particular turn, and the others would actually want to emulate what the others have done. You've seen now the build-up moving from the platinum belt, and now we're in the metals industry. But the fact of the matter is that the trust deficit also that the governor made mention of, which we all refer to from time to time. We need a social compact that begins to look at the interests of the country rather than narrow sectoral interests as we see in the past few days and months.
Is that the better option? Final question on this, a social contract, rather than giving government power perhaps legally to break protracted strikes when there's no agreement in sight?
Look at a practical level. We have one of the most conducive industrial relations environment. I always say to people, you know, imagine what would happen if we didn't have the existing institutions in our labor relations environment, including all other processes that we should allow to take course. Ranging from the bargaining process itself, collective, and moving into the mediation processes right up to arbitration. And we have put in place those mechanisms, and I think only when you have exhausted those that you would then be looking at other ones. But also I think it is unfair to expect that government would be able to change the law in the middle of labor unrest just in order to rein in the workers instead of allowing the existing mechanisms to take fold. But government, from time to time, as we have seen the Minister of Labour intervening, but to a very limited extent in order to bring the parties together so that they can find a lasting solution to their challenges.
All right, Minister, let's move to the BRICS Summit. You've just returned, and it looks like we're firmly part of this grouping. We're now contributing to a development bank, to a currency fund, and I'd just like to know, I understand we're putting in about 2 billion for the bank, about 5 for the sovereign fund. Is that going to be a drain on the fiscus, and does South Africa receive benefits that outweigh that?
Look, the bank in total will have authorized capital of 100 billion, with 100 billion US dollars, with 50 billion subscribed. Of this, and also the way it is structured, 20% will be paid in capital, and that's where the 2 billion you are referring to comes from, and then 80% will be callable capital. And we have agreed that all members will have equal shareholding, with the result that our contribution, which you have referred to, of 2 billion, is payable over 7 years in pre-agreed installments. So if you look at 2 billion paid over 7 years, that's not much of a drain. But you must also take into account that the purpose of putting in this amount is in order to actually put our investment in order for us to kickstart an infrastructure investment program that is intended to mobilize other resources that should actually have both economic and social returns for the country. So it's not just expenditure, but it's an investment. But also it is beginning to look at how best we can actually make our contribution as the shareholder in the bank, but also benefit from using you spoke earlier about the 5 billion on the contingency reserve. The contingency reserve is actually a commitment which does not require a new capital injection immediately, but also it is funded by it is the pooling of our foreign reserves that we already have. It's not on the fiscus, the CRA, but also it's not immediate injection of those funds, but a commitment that allows us to be able to, in case we have an issue of the balance of payment challenges, to be able to call on twice as much as we have committed. So we've committed 5 billion, but we can call on up to 10 billion. And you will have seen that those that have put in more, the formula is such that they can call on a less or a smaller multiplier than ours. China will actually can call on half of what they have put in. The other 3 countries can call on about exactly an equal amount of what they have committed.
Minister, that's very interesting. There was some excitement because our rand has been fragile. We've been lumped as part of the fragile 5. Some believe that it could help the currency, but 10 billion, is that enough if our currency is falling?
Look, this serves to complement the other existing mechanisms that serve to stem the tide of a weakening currency. But also, if you look at, we earlier spoke about the structural reforms that we need to implement in order to be able to boost our trade, our exports, in order to be able to accumulate reserves that would be able to also to cushion us from this vulnerability. And even though I don't agree with the lumping of us as a fragile 5, you can put any number to it. The fact of the matter is that we play in a very fragile environment, which everybody is exposed to, but we will then have varying degrees of weathering the storm.
Minister, for lay people, can you also make the bank simple? So this is about infrastructure development. We know that a huge build project is planned in South Africa. Does it practically help people in South Africa who are part of those projects and the rest of Africa?
Indeed, it does, because both South Africa and the region and the continent at large, because, as you would know, that our infrastructure gap or the backlog is quite huge. Some research places it, I think it's the World Bank research that places it at close to 100 billion per annum. And no amount of our own resources and other institutions will be able to address that unless we actually strengthen that. And what the bank then does, introduces another mechanism of being able to pull resources from the BRICS countries, but also to mobilize other investment partners into this. And that is why you'll find that this is also launched in the context of some work that the trade track has also been working on, but also our business council formed amongst these 5 countries, which are also going to be taking advantage of this platform that we have created of putting together this infrastructure development fund.
Minister, this summit comes at a time when many would say that a lot of the BRICS countries are losing clout. We have low growth rates, the Reserve Bank reducing expectations again today. I believe Brazil, Russia, the same. Do you still have high hopes for this grouping? And can we say things like another minister said that there's a new world order, that we're moving towards something and we want to be part of it?
Look, the grouping of the emerging markets that we are, the 5 of us, shows that we have a unified objective of getting our economies onto a higher growth trajectory. But, the theme for this 6th summit was inclusive growth, sustainable solutions, where we're beginning to look at where exactly we need to invest in order to be able to grow our economies. And infrastructure is one of them, but we're also beginning to look at other sectors that we need to invest in, and also the interconnectedness of our economies and the continent. If you look at Africa as one of those identified as the growth areas, our investment, and that is why the importance of the establishment of the regional office in South Africa is going to be quite significant as we move into mobilizing resources in order to deal with the issues of regional integration and working on projects that would raise Africa's growth trajectory.
All right. Thank you for your time this evening, Minister. That was the Finance Minister, Nene, upbeat about the BRICS, although, of course, we are facing huge problems in our own economy at the moment, and he was willing to address some of those comments made by the Reserve Bank Governor today. Let's take a look at how the markets reacted to another interest rate hike. The JSE breaking its winning streak. A fresh round of U.S. sanctions on Russia is weighing on stock markets across the world. The interest rate hike, bad news, of course, for retailers and banks. It could dampen spending a little more in South Africa. The all-share index fell by 0.5%, with all the main boards in the red. African Bank, one of the biggest losers, which is not unusual. The telecoms and retailers in the red. Shoprite fell by 1.5%. Woolworths by more than 2%. The miners largely closing in the red today. Big resources stocks, Anglo and Billiton, fell by more than 8% each. Amplats led the platinum miners down, falling by close to 2%. Harmony rose, but the other major gold miners fell. Looking at the actual commodity prices, gold has risen, perhaps on safe haven buying. Oil prices also being boosted by a sharp drop in U.S. crude oil stockpiles. And finally, the rand not seemingly at this moment reacting much to the marginal increase in interest rates. It last closed at 10 Rand 67 to the dollar. It's weakened slightly, currently at 10 Rand 69.